Welcome to part 4 in our series on yoga, mindfulness, and body-based interventions. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics as a yoga teacher, trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive yoga. So first, we're going to do a short movement exercise with mindful movement. So you might sit in a position or stand in a position where your feet are on the floor. Spine is nice and tall, and you can either avert your gaze away from the computer or close your eyes, whichever you would prefer. Take a couple of breaths and begin to notice how your body is feeling today. See if you can notice if there's some parts of your body that's holding on to tension or tightness. And simply start with that awareness. Bring your attention to your neck and keeping your spine nice and tall, tuck your chin down towards your chest. And start to either look over one shoulder, come back to center and look over the other, or start to make full circles nice and slow through your neck. If you're making full circles, keep a little support on your neck, chin tucked and spine tall just a little bit when you go to the back. If you're moving in one direction, you might switch to the other. Notice any tension in your neck and invite that to soften and release a little bit. As you're ready, come back to center. Bring your awareness to your shoulders. And if you'd like, you can start to roll your shoulders back and down. You could do both at the same time or one and then the other. See how that feels in your body. You might at some point reverse that, bring your shoulders forward and down and see what that feels like. Do a couple more and then come back to stillness. And then one last movement. We're going to bring our arms out to the side. As you inhale, bring your arms up overhead. You might even look up with a gentle back bend. As you exhale, bring your arms down and out to the side. Inhale, lift up. Stretch tall. Exhale, come down. One more breath. Inhale up. And exhale down. And then pause and check in with your body. See if anything feels a tiny bit different. And know that it's okay if it doesn't. Something might feel different, something might not feel different. No wrong answer. If your eyes are closed, begin to blink them open and come back to our activity. All right, one of the things that I wanted to mention quickly, since I'm currently here in India, is that there's a lot of difference in yoga therapy and yoga, trauma-sensitive yoga, trauma-informed yoga in the United States versus India. So in the United States, we focus a lot on the movement or asana part. And we're going to talk a lot in this PowerPoint about how we're using asana to create that connection with the body. Sometimes we'll do some breath work, so that long exhale that we were talking about in the last part of this series might be something we're doing. Sometimes we do a little bit of guided meditation, yoga nidra, or even silent meditation. But for the most part, we're really focusing on the asana or the movement part. In India, there's a lot more focus on yoga as a holistic lifestyle. So this is looking at everything from the kleshas, the koshas, the times of day that you're getting up and what you're eating. It's an overall lifestyle. There's a lot more use of yoga philosophy and texts, as well as following specific teachers for a lifestyle than there is in the United States. So just know that there's differences. It's neither good or bad, it's just the way it is. We're focusing a little bit more in this PowerPoint on how we're using yoga as a body-based intervention in the United States. So I do want to have a reminder that there's a huge difference between trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. So all of you can be, and hopefully are, trauma-informed. That means that whatever activity you're doing or leading is being done knowing that there's people in the group that have experienced trauma, and that might react differently to what you're doing because they have experienced trauma. So any general yoga teacher, anyone who has at least their 200-hour training, can be trauma informed simply by understanding that and maybe doing a few things in class to create a safe space and know that people might need something different. Individuals all need slightly different things. Trauma sensitive is different. Trauma sensitive is for the health professional, the mental health therapist, who is also a yoga teacher and is using this exercise specifically to work with a mental health diagnosis. Trauma, anxiety, depression, whatever it is, does not matter. So our trauma-sensitive yoga experience is something that's being led by a person with a clinical degree and clinical experience in working with trauma. And this class is specifically being used to assist with that trauma or other type of experience. So I teach yoga at the gym. I teach that from a trauma-informed lens. I'm not doing anything special in that class for people who've had trauma. But in my private practice, I also teach trauma-sensitive classes that are very specific to the population I'm working with. So I'll teach a trauma-sensitive yoga for depression series or something like that. So that is being created and led specifically to focus on that trauma or other mental health diagnosis. So just know that those terms are not interchangeable and be aware of what it is that you are doing. So we're going to talk about the Trauma Center's trauma-sensitive yoga description. So the Trauma Center is in Massachusetts, and it is David Emerson, had some work with Bessel van der Kolk, but it was kind of the first exploration of yoga as a body-based intervention to help with people who've experienced trauma and other mental health situations. So this methodology is using basically Hatha yoga, where we're looking at engaging in a series of physical shapes and movements, but we're using it in a slightly different way. So we're modifying how we're teaching this to maximize experiences of empowerment and to help people have a better relationship to their body. So one of the things I often talk about in my trauma courses at the university is that we really can't do anything until we help people feel safe. And one of the places that they need to feel safe is they need safety in their body. And to do that, we have to start with small, simple things and small, simple choices. So this is going to be looking a lot at doing physical activities, but not worrying about what it looks like. So as opposed to a lot of other asana or hatha classes, we're not really worried about alignment. We're not really worried about the best expression of a particular position. We're using these different positions to have an experience internally in the body and notice what it feels like. So our focus instead is on the internal experience of the people in the group. We're noticing what things feel like. So what does it feel like when I raise my arms overhead? Do I enjoy that? Do I dislike that? Is it kind of neutral? Is there something that comes up for me when I lift my arms overhead? We're noticing the body's experience. We're also choosing what to do with that. Do I want to keep my arms overhead, or do I want to do something different? And we're giving people lots of opportunities to make those choices. So in a standard class, you might have a lot of focus on get in this position, keep your arms overhead, make sure your arms are straight. But in our trauma sensitive class, we might suggest that people bring their arms overhead and invite them to notice what that feels like, and then decide if they want to keep their arms lifted over their head or if they want to bring them to a different position. So we're really shifting this orientation, this experience from that external making shapes with the body to the internal, what does this feel like? And this is one of the key parts of our yoga as a body-based intervention. This also really helps people with the idea of empowerment. So in this approach, the power is in the individual, the client, the participant, the student, not the yoga instructor. So we're not worried about people all doing the same thing. We're worried about people having their own individual felt sense of what's happening in their body, and then using that to make choices. So this is allowing trauma-sensitive yoga to help people make a stronger connection between their mind and their body, to be able to be aware of how their body feels, and also to bring a sense of agency, that ability to make their own choices back into the body. Because that is often one of the key things that people feel like they've lost. They did not have a choice in that situation. So we're offering choices to bring that agency back. A couple of key things that I like to mention to people. If you are a mental health professional and you are going to use yoga, make sure you have training in yoga. If you're doing yoga movements, stretching and breathing, that is absolutely fine. Just don't say that you're doing yoga without that training. One of the key reasons you're going to do that in the United States is because it's very easy to be sued if you represent yourself as doing something that you are not trained in doing. And then one other key piece we've already mentioned, we're really focusing on the client's experience in the body. Alignment is not important. And physical adjustments are not going to be used. So we are not going to be walking around the room and moving people's physical bodies. If you're doing this in a group setting, there's some things that you might want to think about that's a little bit different, maybe, than in your typical yoga class. So you're going to look at the setup of your room. Are there mirrors in your room? We generally prefer not to have mirrors. We don't want people looking at the external shape of their body. We want that internal experience. Look at lighting. Is there enough light in the room that people feel safe? In my trauma sensitive classes, I don't turn off the lights for our final rest. I might dim them a little bit, but I'm actually going to say, you will hear me walking to the back of the room so that I can dim the lights a little bit for our final rest so that people always know where I am. Think about the space where you put your mats, where you're going to be as the yoga instructor in any of these classes. But trauma sensitive classes, you want to stay on your mat where people can see you and you're practicing with them so that you're part of the group. We're not having this power differential. Privacy is also important. One of my first trauma sensitive classes we did in a space that was offered to us for free, but it was not a very private space. And even though we were told that no one would come into the space during that time, we had men just kind of randomly walking through the middle of our class. That does not create a safe space for people, so we actually had to change the place that we did our class. Again, adjustments and alignments. We are not doing any kind of physical hands-on adjustments. You might do verbal suggestions, especially if you see something that might not be healthy in the long run. But we're going to suggest this to the whole class. So instead of saying, Michelle, you need to make sure your knee is not going beyond your ankle in this warrior one position. You're going to say, everyone, look down towards your knee and make sure it's right above your ankle. So we're suggesting the whole class, and then we're modeling this at the same time. We are actually doing the same activity on our mat with everyone. We're gonna have a lot of repetition in these classes. Most people who come to a trauma sensitive class haven't done a lot of yoga. Or if they have, they've done like power yoga to check out and not be aware of their body. So the only person I've ever had really struggle in one of my trauma sensitive classes was someone who did power yoga 3 times a week and thought, oh, this class will be easy. It'll be nothing. I don't think it's going to be a big deal. And then I asked her to slow down and pay attention to her body. And then she started to be aware of some different things. And that was difficult for her. So we're going to do lots of repetition. They don't know a lot about yoga typically. So we're going to give them a chance to get to know this stuff. So my classes from week 1 to week 6 might be somewhat similar. That's okay. We are giving people a chance to get familiar with the activity so that they can go more into that internal state. And then another thing to think about is music. Here in India, they don't use music in yoga classes at all. So that's not even an issue. If you're using music, as most classes in the United States do, think about what music that you are using and why you're using that. So I tend to go to either instrumental music of songs that people don't know, or music in other languages that people don't know, because what I don't want is for a familiar song to come up and for that to bring someone into a certain memory and possibly be triggering, or to have maybe an unfamiliar song, but with lyrics that are maybe not particularly the tone of what we want to create. So once I was working with a group of students and I asked them to create the playlist for one of our sessions, and they picked a song that says, "Take Me to Church" over and over and over again. A lot of the individuals that I work with have had a lot of trauma from within a church setting. So what we don't want to be doing is reminding them about going to church or suggesting that they go to church over and over again. So we had to adjust our playlist and the students learned a great lesson. So these are just a few things that you might think about as you're preparing to lead a trauma sensitive class, especially. But a lot of these things can be incorporated into your trauma informed class as well. So you might consider not doing hands-on adjustments. I typically don't. If you do, that's okay. But you might make sure that you're asking permission before you ever touch a person. And you might even tell them what you're going to do. You might say, hey, can I help you move your arm to a different position? A lot of these things we can do without that physical touch. So you might say, take a look at your arm and see if you can bring it parallel to the floor. That will help them move their arm up without that physical adjustment. As I've been taking classes here in India, I noticed that that's really not the state or the way of thinking. They just come around and move your arm. That's just the way it is. But if we're working from our trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive formats, we're trying to do something a little different. I will say I don't love those little cue cards that people put at the front of the mat that say, I want physical adjustments or not, because everyone can see those cards. And some people might feel like they have to allow physical adjustments. They have to have the card turn the same way as everyone else, even if they really don't want that. So I would prefer either individual asking or putting people into a position such as child's form where they can't see everyone else in the room, and then asking, please raise your hand if you would like to not have physical adjustments. I've seen quite a few teachers do that wonderfully. So just a few things to think about and consider as you are setting up your class space. One of the things that might be different from some classes, definitely different from classes here in India, could be different depending on the setting that you're in, is we're going to do a lot of invitational language. So instead of telling people, do this, put your foot here, raise your arms this way, we might say, when you're ready, I invite you to. You might notice if it feels good to you to cue people to do something a little bit deeper and make those choices. Now, you're not going to use these phrases for every single thing because that would never work in a yoga class. You could do it if you're doing a one-on-one session, maybe, But if you're doing a class, you're not going to use these phrases for every single thing. But you might get someone into a basic position and then suggest, if you would like to, you can try the next level. If you would like to, you can try adding this. If you would like to, you can notice this part of your body where you might think that that's a place where people often feel sensation in that position. So you can use these in a trauma-informed class just as much, totally up to you. For trauma-sensitive classes, we're also going to avoid the word pose. So we've noted that in some positions, especially for childhood abuse, people have been told to pose in certain positions for photographs or whatever. So we're going to just avoid the word pose. So you're going to say child's form instead of child's pose. We're going to say position or form instead. Yeah, so just a thought that you might avoid that word. We don't use it a ton, but that's okay. If you're looking at the format of our classes, there's going to be some themes that we're really looking at, especially in our trauma-sensitive classes, but wonderful if you can include these in some of your trauma-informed classes. I think almost every class I go to, trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, general class at the gym, they all have some kind of grounding, which is great. Some kind of let's get centered, let's calm our system down, let's start to connect to ourselves. Another theme that we often have is that relationship and reconnection. Two layers to this. One is to have that experience sharing it with another person in relationship with the yoga teacher, as well as perhaps other people in the room. There's also that reconnection to the individual's own inner experience, and that's again creating safety in the body. We're going to have a huge emphasis on attunement, which is basically being in the present moment. So we're going to talk a lot in our next part of the series on mindfulness, but we're going to be working with mindfulness to stay in this present moment. And that actually helps our fear center, the amygdala, to shrink. So that gives the rest of our brain some more space to be aware, to concentrate, to make decisions. That part of your brain actually gets bigger and your amygdala can get smaller. We're going to have a lot of themes on compassion, self-love, feeling worthy, acceptance, being patient with yourself. Yeah, lots of themes on that. Many people have trouble feeling like they can accept themselves and offer themselves the same amount of love and respect that they offer to other people. And then again, super key idea, empowerment, helping people feel like they are able to make effective choices and effective actions. So you can use all of these ideas throughout one class. What I often do is I'll focus on each one of these as one class in a series of 6. So grounding is the first class, relationship and reconnection is the second class. Mostly I'm just going to be focusing on talking about these ideas as we're doing the activities. And then in the 6th class, we're going to put it all together. You could use a little bit of this in every single class. That would also work. But we're going to reintroduce these themes. We're going to focus on these ideas as much as we can. These are some key ideas that actually has been written up in a paper that I wrote with Kelly Climby and Rachel Morrow from the Grand Rapids Healing Center. So you might look up that article if you want more information. One question that I like to ask my students in my classes is this idea that no intervention that takes power away from a survivor can foster their recovery, no matter how much it appears to be in their immediate best interest. So a good example of this in our yoga setting. So say you're looking at a person, they're doing Warrior One and their knee is going way out beyond their ankle. In the long run, doing that once or twice is not going to hurt them. Is it going to be more important for them to make the choice to stay in that position because maybe it feels okay in that moment? Or is it going to be more important that we try to correct them and bring their knee back over their ankle? So even if in the immediate moment, our instinct is to say, I want that knee to be right above the ankle. That's a better alignment position. That's more safe in the long run. For that one day, it's not going to hurt the person. So taking away that power from the person is not going to be useful. It's better to, over the long run, let them make that choice for themselves. If it's something that you're really physically worried about, do it in private. Don't do it in the front of the class. Don't do it in the middle of the session where you're trying to get them to be in their bodies. Find a different format to give that suggestion, or have it be something that you're suggesting to the whole class. So we're trying to use yoga to give power to the survivor through giving them the opportunity to make their own choices. All right, so this is kind of how I started thinking about yoga therapy way back when I started doing this. I thought if we can find the right positions, we can work with all of these different diagnoses, and all we really need to do is get the right series of positions. Fortunately, it's not quite that simple. Because the overall general idea is that we're looking at helping people find sensation and safety in their bodies and make choices for themselves. But there are a few things that in general do cause changes to our body system. So we've talked a little bit about the inhales and the exhale. We take a big inhale that wakes us up, that gets us into our sympathetic nervous system a little bit. If we take that really nice long exhale, that's getting us into our parasympathetic system. In general, that's going to be true. Notice that for every individual, there might be something different. So if you're working with someone with a military background, they may have been taught that when they squeeze the trigger on a gun, when they're shooting at someone, they're supposed to do a long exhale. If that's their association, that when I'm exhaling, I'm physically shooting a gun to harm someone, this breath pattern might not be something that you focus on. You might do something completely different. However, in general, that's the way our systems work. In general, forward folds help our body to slow down, decrease anxiety, and help with sleep. So any of our forward folds from sitting or standing can be helpful for that. Legs up the wall is also a great variation for that. For depression, we often notice people's bodies language when they're depressed is they hunch in, they try to disappear. So the more we can do chest openers, things where we're really pulling our shoulders back, maybe even getting really big, that can bring more energy into the body. So there's a couple of little hints of things that might be useful if I'm doing a class focused on depression. I probably am going to have a lot of back bends and heart opening positions and things where we get big. For focusing on a class for anxiety, probably going to have a lot of forward folds. So there's a couple general things you can look at, but it's not necessarily going to be as simple as we put the right sequence of positions together. We can work on, let's say, bringing healing to that specific diagnosis. So again, we're focusing more on empowerment and letting people make choices. Some of these, if you're looking at this as a doorway to the cognitive understanding, we can help people. I would do this more on individual private yoga sessions. You could use the physical sensations to connect to emotions, to connect to memories. You can use that a little bit to make meaning out of things. So you could use some body-based interventions. It's a doorway into that cognitive understanding, especially with the emotional part. However, in general, with trauma-sensitive yoga, we're just creating physical sensations and safety. Again, the focus is on noticing the experience right now and making choices of what to do with the body. And one last note, most of the time, these are considered adjunctive treatments. So if you're the mental health professional side, you're probably going to be also doing other interventions at the same time. I've noticed for me, it works better if these two things are separated. That could be a couple of different ways. Sometimes I'm doing trauma therapy, other forms of talk-based, EMDR, whatever it is, for a one-on-one appointment. And then they're coming to me for their group yoga, trauma sensitive yoga class. I've had some people who have a different therapist to do their talking work, and then they come see me for individual private yoga sessions. So you might have a couple different ways that you can put this together. But typically, if you try to do both in the same session with the same person, it's going to kind of get blurred together and not work quite as well. So overall, adjunctive treatments, you're still doing something else, but it's really important to get the body involved and not just be working with this cognitive part of the brain. We need to be working with everything else so that we can create the safety, help people be aware of what their body is feeling like, and helping them to make positive changes over time through those effective action choices. And I believe that is the end of our part 4. So thank you for joining me once again. We have one more section left. We're going to look a little bit more at mindfulness in our last section, but thank you for joining me for this one.